workshop video log. The Velocette, the KTS we had in here, as you remember, we had quite a few things to sort out on this. A little bit of history about it. It is the KTS, it's the 350 1937. It's basically the race engine that was used in the bikes a year before. It was using a KSS. What's special about these? It's overhead cam, it's bevel drive, and we explained, and we'll talk about this in a moment, a lot of bikes have a push-rod tube here. This is a tube that holds the shaft, and here we have a bevel drive box, and we have overhead camshaft. So it's quite a sporty engine. I would imagine it's quite an expensive bike to produce for a road bike. The idea was for me to recommission this, get it up and running for the customer. It had been bought at an auction back in 2005 at Bewley, and it wasn't a runner. It had been sort of cobbled together. It had belonged to a guy by the name of Eric Housley. Now, Eric Housley, I believe, he was a racer, raced in the Isle of Man. I'm not sure whether he raced Velocettes, but he definitely raced Gold Stars, and I think he'd done fairly well in his time. This bike, I would imagine, could have been built up with some of these parts if he had been racing, because it has got the oil tank here. It's got a froth tower. Now, for a standard bike, that wouldn't have been the tank. What we found with this, when it came in, it had the wrong carburetor. It had a concentric. It wasn't going to go on it. It had just been coupled on there. Now, it wouldn't run. The clutch was slipping. The timing was well out, and the valve clearances were wrong. And I put straight away, I had this carburetor. It's the 276 pre-monoblock carb. So I put the carb on. We sorted the clutch out, retimed it, set the valves, made sure there's plenty of oil in it, managed to get it going. And you probably look and you'll see, and you'll hear on the video, and you've probably seen it already, there was quite a lot of noise coming from the engine. I wasn't quite sure where it was coming from, but it was coming from the bevel drive. The bevel drive is important not to get it over tight. On here, it's all about the gaskets, the thickness of the gaskets. Someone had made paper gaskets, and there was a tight spot on the bevel drive. I think it was on the top one. Also, you might remember seeing lots of oil leaking from this tube. Now, this tube had been damaged. There's a big chip out of it. So that's a case of welding that up. And the sealing on these bevel drives, top and bottom, in the old days had like an asbestos string. I've modified this to, I've used O-rings, and what I've done is I've used the bench grinder, and I've taken the radius off, the curve off of the O-ring on the outside, squared it off, and I put those in now, tight fit inside with a bit of silicone. It doesn't leak. That works quite well. If anyone wants to have trouble sealing these up, that works really well. If you probably saw that previous to this, the barrel had some broken fins, so we've had some fins made for it. There's one little one down here which we didn't worry about, but some big fins at the top were broken, so they were replaced. The barrel was honed. Now it has been what we call a liner put in there. Obviously it had gone past its sale-by date on oversized piston, and what you can do, you can put a liner inside, so it's overboard again, a liner put inside, and the piston matched. Now the piston in here is probably outside completely different from a Velocette. It looks like it's a Jap piston out of a JAP, not a Japanese one, and it's slightly high compression. Now we put some rings in here. We can't bore that out because the line is too thin, so I did say to the customer, look, I can put rings in it, but really, if you're going to keep it and do any real mileage on it, you might want to find another barrel. So that was one thing that we had to sort out. It's okay, we replaced some rings and it's not too bad. Now the gearbox had this all apart. You might notice that we had the sleeve gear, and that was badly worn. but we also found the casing had been broken in the past. It's been damaged. Now that could well be that was part of his collection of parts. Had he erased something like this that he had kept in the shed, because the casing had been welded back up. We had to put a new lay shaft bush in and thrust, and I say we replaced the sleeve gear. We put new clutch springs in because some of those were missing. It has about 12 little clutch springs in a basket, and it's a totally different clutch to a conventional clutch. So the engine, the last time you saw this was on the bench and I had the barrel off, but I have actually split the cases. The reason I done that was I wanted to wash it all out the crankcase and also check to make sure the bearings are okay. And I found the cases had got no sealant, so we done our usual well seal, went through it all properly, and like I say, the mag was okay. I supplied the carburetor, we've rejetted it, put some new parts in the carb. The dynamo, it's got a Miller ammeter and it's got a different charge unit on here. I think I'm right in saying the ammeter has, it will show a charge, but if you want to increase your charge, this light switch here doubles up as a charge light. First position here is charge. So I think what the idea is, if you want extra charge to the battery, if we run it down a little bit, it goes to that position. That position is high beam, and if we look at the front of the bike, we've got the high beam on, and we've got a dip switch here. There you go. And the third position is a low beam, just a side light. Because of its age, it doesn't have a brake switch. So the back light is tiny. So all we have here, I'll turn it back on. You can see we just have a very small light. No brake switch, because they didn't have to have that in the 30s. And we've kept it authentic. It's as it should be, really. I don't think it's going to do a lot of mileage, this. I say we've done the engine, we've done the gearbox. Really, it was a case of just improving a few things. A few like on the girders here. You got the damper, had a damper wash here, it's all perished. We've just gone through it and tidied up things on it. Rewired a lot of the wiring because that had literally perished in the headlight. Made sure it's charging okay. Oh, what I was going to mention here, the dynamo has the regulator built into here. This earlier type one. It's a little bit different to the Scott one because that's 38, this is 37, and it is working okay. So we'll start it up and our meter will show a reading. Yeah, it's 4-speed gearbox, conventional. It is slightly high compression. When we were working on this, we found that it had a couple of decompression plates to lower the compression. The only thing with that, it raises the barrel, and the shaft that runs inside the tube here, where it meshes into the drive, there was quite a lot of movement. I've taken one of those out. Now, to check that, first of all, to make sure that the piston won't get clouded by a valve, what you do, put a bit of plasticine, I'll show you later on, in the expansion chamber and turn the engine over to make sure that the valve won't touch the piston, and you can see how much pressure it will put onto the plasticine and how far down it squish. So that's something we're showing in a moment. It starts okay. We'll start it up now, see if I can get it to go a bit easier this time, because it's got high compression. Although it's got a decompressor, or a valve lifter. We just put, there's not a lot of fuel, just put the taps on. I won't give it any choke or anything. Just bring it back from full advance. Just free the clutch off. Just get it over compression. to show you now on the ammeter. You can show it's charging here. We see the needle flick over. So this is the off position. This is a charge, extra charge for if the battery's a bit low. You can charge it from here. This is our high beam. This is our pilot light. When we go back to that, we have our main and our dip. The horn. What's missing from this bike at the moment is a steering damper. And I think the customer's going to try and get hold of a damper for it, and the rod and the friction washer. But it was a case of building the bike up, not to spend too much money, because he purchased this idea a long time ago, 2005, and it had never run. So now it's up together, and if he can get on with it, it'd be a nice bike to ride occasionally. But I think it's a bike possibly that might be a collection, because they aren't an easy bike if you haven't ridden this sort of bike before. But it runs, it's all tight and it runs fairly well. We've got a good return on the oil tank. What's important on Velocettes, I'll explain, down here on the oil pump there's a pressure regulating screw here. And when you adjust that, you want to put an oil gauge on here and get about 8 psi, because this relies on oil being pushed up here, up through the outside, like a baffle on the outside. You've got the shaft in the middle, oil come up here and lubricate the bevel drive here, obviously that gear in there as it comes up, and then it goes in the bevel drive box, it goes into the rocker box, and round the other side, out of the rocker box here, and it'll come down and it goes straight to the crankcase, and then it scavenge back to the oil tank. So the feed and the return is very important. Now on these you don't get a heavy supply of oil back to the tank. Now she's ticking over and you see spurts of oil coming through there. That is correct. And if I rev it a little bit, that will probably slow down a bit. When it comes back to a tick, it'll pick up the oil again. If that's set up incorrectly, you don't want to over oil, because you end up with so much oil in the crankcase. It's a little bit quirky to start, but I think, you know, once you get used to its technique, it wants a rubber on there. This was all a bit iffy as well. This would go back too far before, so I've messed around with this and it's better now and it's not flopping about.